Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video, the third in our series evaluating the first term in office of President Donald J. Trump, and whether the president has stuck to his 2016 promises. What are we talking about today? Well, in the famous words of Bill Clinton's strategist, it's the economy, stupid. In this video, we'll take a look at Trump's promises to change and strengthen the American economy. As with all of the videos in this series, we'll take a look at the initial promises, whether they've been successfully delivered, the potential defense for why they haven't come to fruition, hello Corona, any future commitments the Trump campaign's made on this issue, and finally, what Joe Biden and the Democrats plan to do in this area. Before we get into that though, a quick shout out to everyone who's been backing us on Patreon. These backers help us make more content across the TLDR network and support the work we're doing. In return, they get bonus perks like exclusive live events, behind-the-scenes posts, early access to videos, merch discounts, exclusive merch items, and their names mentioned in videos. Hey Jade Peak. Find out what you can get over on our Patreon page. It's linked down below. Trump's major promises on the economy were nothing newfangled or out of the ordinary. The big ideas centered around tax, jobs, economic growth, and in keeping with trying to make America great again, manufacturing. First up, like in every election, we have promises about taxes. Due to it being one of the ever-present battles between the right and the left, tax, more specifically tax bands and tax rates, are ever changing. Income is taxed in bands at a marginal rate. You're not taxed at all up to a certain level. Then for any earnings after that, your income may be taxed at increasingly higher rates. So, hypothetically for example, any earnings up to $20,000 may be untaxed, but earnings between $20,000 and $30,000 may be taxed at 10%. Then further earnings between $30,000 and $60,000 at 20%, and so on. Basically, the more you earn, the more tax you pay. Trump wanted to reduce the number of bands from the existing 7 to 3. He also promised to reduce the rate of tax paid in each band across the board, reducing the top rate of tax from just under 40% to 33%. By reducing the number of bands and simultaneously reducing the rate paid in each band, the bands have a bigger range at each lower end, and so more people can reduce the tax paid on their income. For corporation tax, the rate businesses pay, Trump promised to reduce the rate to 15%, which would make it far lower than the worldwide average of 22.5% at the time. In addition to this, clearly with the aim of stimulating economic growth in the US, he wanted to prevent companies, think Starbucks and Google at the time, from having overseas HQs, and thus forcing them to pay tax in the US. In terms of promises around jobs, Trump said that he would create 25 million over the next 10 years. Much of the focus on job creation was around the revitalization of the manufacturing sector, containing voters more likely to vote for Trump, which had been basically decimated throughout the 21st century compared to how it was before. He also wanted to get the economy growing at 4%, a projection which economists felt at the time would not be feasible, and the average was a desired 3.5% over 10 years. For context, the world average GDP growth was below 3% in the 4 years prior, although it had been above 3%, even hitting 4% in the 2 years after the recovery from the Great Recession. In the US though, year-on-year growth had varied between 1.5 and 2.8% in Obama's second term. So these are the promises. How did Trump deliver on them? Well, the aptly named 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act went a long way to show his intention to apply what he promised. While the ambitious tax promises were not fully met, the general gist was there in the bill. The corporation tax rate was cut significantly to 21%, still below the world average. Although the number of income tax bands was not reduced, 5 of the 7 bands had their tax rates reduced, marking some sort of progress towards implementing Trump's agenda, and this is clearly an indication of success. One strange part of the bill is that it expires in 2025. Whether this is positive or negative for Trump is up in the air. It could mean that tax rates just go back to how they were, or it could be a chance for a future Republican, dare we say Donald Trump Jr., to further reduce them. Despite the success, there is the issue that it's been found that 83% of the benefits of these tax reductions have gone to the top 1% of society. Critics would argue that this does nothing to help income inequality, and morally, you have to consider the issues here, even if Trump has technically succeeded in his aims. In February, before the coronavirus hit, the US economy had gained 6.6 million jobs in Trump's term, which is actually less than was created in the last 3 years of Obama's second term. Growth in the first 3 years of Trump's term was 2.2% in 2017, 3.2% in 2018, and 2.3% in 2019. This is healthy growth, but not exactly near where Trump promised it would be. And some even suggest that this has not been to do with the measures that President Trump has taken, but rather just natural strong economic performance in the boom-bust cycle, continuing on from where Obama left off. While it's fair to say that Trump took over a good economy, it is unfair to him to suggest that he's done nothing to keep it thriving. That being said, there are also concerns about the state of the economy, and that's partly because the massive tax cuts haven't managed to stimulate the economy to the degree that one might expect. One of the core arguments for lowering taxes is that it will put more money into people's pockets, allowing increased spending, and thus increasing the amount of taxable spending and revenue. The theory is that by cutting tax rates, a government can actually end up collecting more taxes due to the increased economic activity. The problem for Trump is that his tax cuts, which favoured the ultra-wealthy, don't seem to have done this, leading to a huge budget deficit, and thus national debt is beginning to build. Long term, this is clearly detrimental to the economy. So while short term things might be looking good, well, until Corona, there may be problematic impacts further down the line. Now, manufacturing. This is a weird one, because there seem to be plenty of conflicting reports out there. Manufacturing is still following the trend of dropping as a share of the economy, and in some industrial heartland states, full of Trump supporters, jobs actually fell in 2019. Forbes has described the manufacturing situation as unfortunately tepid. Jobs in manufacturing did rise in Trump's first couple of years in office, leading some to describe it as a boom. But it looks to have dropped since then, even pre-COVID. So on this one, maybe it's fair to say that results have been mixed. In Trump's defense, we are currently living through one of the biggest economic shocks of all time. So in terms of any evaluation of the economy from March onwards, we have to be very careful. COVID has led to an enormous 32.9% decline in the US economy, so it's probably fair to say that we'll never be able to truly, fairly evaluate Trump's impact on the US economy and whether he fulfilled all of his promises. That's why most of the data from this video has been based on his first 3 years in office. But what does the future hold for Trump and the economy in the 2020 campaign? Trump has promised 10 million new jobs in 10 months, which shouldn't be too hard considering the natural economic recovery after COVID. He's also promised tax credits for Made in America businesses. There's also a clear focus on protecting US jobs, with Trump also hoping to create trade deals that benefit the US. Much of the same as 2016, as with a lot of Trump plans, but definitely an emphasis on jobs and US success more than economic growth percentages this time round. Naturally, Joe Biden's economic focus has been forced onto responding to the pandemic. His plans are known as Build Back Better. Crucially, in the wake of enormous support for the Black Lives Matter movement over the last few months, Biden has made racial equality a key part of these economic plans. This includes measures like increasing assistance for businesses owned by minorities to the tune of a potential $150 billion, increasing access to affordable housing, and removing tuition fees for those whose household earns less than $125,000, which includes a huge number of Black, Latino, and Native American families. More generally, he's promised increased loans for businesses, helping citizens out with Social Security, and directly reversing Trump's tax cuts. In other ways, Biden hasn't actually been too far away from his presidential rival. he's also taken somewhat of a focused stance on putting America first and manufacturing, much like Trump, albeit in a different way. Biden has said that he'll spend significant sums of money, in the hundreds of billions, to buy American, a phrase which seems very Trumpian. He also attempts to make manufacturing thrive through investing and creating new jobs in green manufacturing, as well as pledging a $2 trillion boost to the green energy sector. So, what do you think? Has Trump fulfilled his economic promises? If not, can you blame him? And how do you feel about the commitments made by the two 2020 candidates? Be sure to check back soon for another episode in the series. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to make sure you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos, just like Jeff Bale, That Guy GW and John McDonald, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.